Chapter 3. Ruling the Countryside. The company becomes Diwan. On 12 August 1765, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. The Mughals charged half of the produce as revenue. The company officials had studied and understood every process of the Mughals' administration. Now, it had to administer and organize its revenue resources and bear cost of maintaining the administrative structure, were expenses and funds for buying Indian goods or products for exporting to Britain. This actual event most probably took place in Robert Clive's administration as shown in the following painting, for which the painter was commissioned by Clive to record the memorable event of his life. The grant of Diwani definitely was one such event in British imagination. Now the company aimed to maximize its income. Their efforts were to increase the revenues as much as it could be and buy the cotton and silk cloth as cheap as possible. The trading company had also to ensure that it could buy the products it needed and sell what it wanted. The company worked with precautions and learnt that it had to move with some caution for this. It pacified those who in the past had ruled the countryside and gained wealth, prestige and enjoyed. The local power was also threat to it. How did the company get its revenue? When, in 1765, the company became the Diwan, revenue collector, or certain areas in India, the company's corrupt servants began to extract huge amount of land revenue from the peasants. They pocketed most of the money, leaving very little for the company. And also, their way of collection caused widespread misery among the peasants and a decline in agricultural production occurred. The company felt a need to restore agriculture as to ensure a regular flow of revenue. It decided to settle the amount of revenue to be collected and who had to pay it. The company's effort was to increase revenue as much as it could and buy fine cotton and silk cloth as cheaply as possible. Thus, within 5 years the value of goods bought by the company in Bengal doubled. Previously, it used imported gold and silver from Britain. Now the revenue of Bengal could finance the purchase of goods for export. The Bengal economy came into a deep crisis. Artisanal production declined and agricultural cultivation showed signs of collapse. In 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal, that is about 1/3 of the population of Bengal. The need to improve agriculture. In 1793, the company finally introduced the permanent settlement in Bengal. Lord Cornwallis later extended it to Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, northern Madras and Banaras, Varanasi. By the term of the settlement, the Rajas and Talukdars were authorized as zamindars. They had to collect rent from the peasants and pay revenue to the company. Of the revenue collected, 89% would go to the state and 11% to the zamindar. As the state's share was fixed permanently, Cornwallis expected them to improve agriculture conditions to increase their own income from increased production from the land. The problem. The company soon found that the zamindars did not invest in the improvement of land and the revenue fixed by it was too high to be paid by the zamindars. Anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost his zamindari. The failed zamindari was sold off at auctions to the money lenders, who became the new zamindars. As long as the zamindars gave out the leased land to tenants at high rates of rent, they were not interested to improve the land. The tenants further subleased their land. The peasants became tenants and had to pay rent to the zamindars. Since the company's shares were permanently fixed, the zamindars continuously increased the rent and peasants had to take loans from Joni lenders. They could be evicted from their land for failing to pay rent or repay loans. This resulted in peasant indebtedness and landlessness. Evaluation of new system. In the 1820s, Holt Mackenzie surveyed in detail the land in the northwestern provinces. He felt that the village was an important social institution in North Indian society and needed to be preserved. He sent the collectors from village to village for inspecting land, measuring the field and recording the customs and rights of different groups. In 1822, now the land revenue settlement was made for the entire Mahal, a revenue estate which may be a village or a group of villages. The estimated revenue of each plot within that village was added up to calculate the revenue that each Mahal had to pay. This demand was revised periodically, not permanently fixed. A village headman was given the charge of collecting and paying the revenue to the company. This system was known as the Mahalwari settlement. The Munro system. The company had followed to move away from the permanent British idea of settlement. Officials Alexander Reed and Thomas Munro Ryotwari a system. That is, a system of collecting revenue directly from the ryots, cultivators. During the Anglo-Mysore Wars, Reed experimented with this system in some areas of South India. Thomas Munro introduced the Ryotwari system in Mysore and Karnataka and expanded it to Bombay and parts of Madras. Crops for Europe. By the mid-18th century, the British tried to control over the growth of the crops that Europe required and to expand the cultivation of opium and indigo. And also forced cultivators in various parts of India to produce other crops, i.e. tea in Assam, jute in Bengal, sugarcane in United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, rice in Madras, wheat in Punjab, cotton in Maharashtra. Why was there a demand for Indian indigo? By the end of 18th century, Britain began to industrialize and its cotton production expanded a lot because of machines. Now, it created a new enormous demand for cloth dye. While the demand of indigo increased, its existing supplies from the West Indies and America collapsed for a variety of reasons. However, between 1783 and 1789 its production fell by half worldwide. The African slaves who worked for indigo plantation of French at Saint-Domingue in the Caribbean island revolted in 1791. They burnt the plantations and killed the planters. Such events led to the collapse of indigo production there. The rising demand for indigo in Europe inspired the East India Company to look for ways to expand the area under indigo cultivation in Bengal. In 1788, only 30% of the indigo imported into Britain was from India. By 1810, the proportion had gone up to 95%. How was indigo cultivated? There were two main systems of indigo cultivation, Nij and Ryoti. A number of people bought the land or rented it from zamindars and became planters, cultivated indigo by directly employing hired laborers. This system of indigo cultivation was called Nij cultivation. Later the planters faced the problem that it was becoming difficult to expand the area under Nij cultivation. Indigo needed to be cultivated only on fertile lands, but these were already densely populated and only small plots were left over the landscape to be acquired. The planters tried to get the land around the indigo factory on lease, thus evicting the peasants from the area. But all this always led to tension and problem with conflicts. Large number of labor was required for large plantations simultaneously. Labor was needed precisely at a time when peasants were usually busy with their rice cultivation. Nij cultivation on a large scale required many plows and bullocks. To purchase them was a big investment and it was not possible even to hire them on rent basis as they were busy on rice fields exactly at the same time that the indigo planters required them. Indigo on the land of ryots. In late 19th century, the planters worked on Ryoti system. Under it, the planters forcibly got an agreement signed from the ryots. At the same time, they forced the village headman to sign the contract on behalf of the ryots. Planters gave them cash advances at low rates of interest to produce indigo, but it was paid for at least 25% of the area under his holding for cultivation indigo. They, planters, provided the seed and the drill while the cultivators prepared the soil, sowed the seed and looked after the crop. Initially, the peasants were tempted by the loan, but very soon they realized the harshness of the system. They got very low price for the indigo and cycle of loans never ended. Secondly, indigo exhausted their fertile soil rapidly. After an indigo harvest, the land was not suitable for growing rice. The Blue Rebellion, and after being unhappy and exhausted, thousands of riots in Bengal refused to grow indigo as the planters exploited and insisted them to sow the next indigo crop on the best soil. And also the planters employed lathials, stick welding strong men. They held the peasants and their family as prisoners on non-payment of loan. They were tortured to any measure. Even the zamindars became angry at being forced to give the planters their land on long leases. In 1859, the indigo riots with the support of village head and zamindar revolted against the planters. They fought pitched battles with the lathials and attacked the indigo factories with arms. Riot people boycotted and beat the planters, helpers and subordinates. After the 1857 revolution, the British government was much worried about another popular rebellion. As the rebellion revolt and its news spread, the lieutenant governor toured the affected region in 1859. The magistrate, Ashley Eden, issued a notice mentioning that riots would not be compelled to accept indigo contracts. Queen Victoria had declared that indigo need not be sown. The government sent the military to protect the planters and set up the Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of its production. The commission found the planters guilty and criticized them for their coercive methods with indigo cultivators. No, it was declared that indigo production was not profitable for riots. Further, the riots were asked to fulfill their existing contracts but not compelled. They were also told that they could refuse to produce indigo in future.